A little while ago, I made a video about how I sucked at golf for a very long time. And then over a couple of years, I got my act together and went from a generous 10-ish handicap down to a legitimate 0.7, which was very cool. In that video, I started talking about some of the lessons I learned, which I broke into two categories. One was off-course lessons, the stuff I learned to do off the course, like on the range or practicing at home or while watching TV, and on-course lessons, which are the things I learned to do during a round that helped me shoot lower scores and get that handicap down. So we covered off-course lessons in that previous video. If you haven't seen it, it's right here. And in this video, we'll talk about part 2, which is on-course lessons. So let's get going. Hey, what's up? Great to have you here. I'm Manu, your host for today. So here's the full list of the on-course changes I made, and you'll notice next to each lesson, I've also added in a time, effort, and impact column. The time and effort are inputs, so how much time and effort they took me to make these changes, and then impact being what was the impact of making these changes. It's good as a nice little gauge of understanding like what are the highest value ones. What you'll notice is most of them were actually pretty high value ones, because why would we talk about low value ones here? And to clarify, I'm not guaranteeing that doing these will make you into a scratch golfer, but I'm also not saying that not doing these will not make you into a scratch golfer. So there's that. Okay, enough preamble. Let's get going with number 1. Okay, so on-course lesson learned number 1 was just doing a physical warm-up. And yeah, it sounds kind of absurd now that I'm just saying this out loud, but I never used to do this previously. I learned how to play golf when I was a kid, and kids don't warm up. It's just not a thing, right? You've got too many other things going on. Your body's always ready, 100% ready to do whatever. So never really warmed up. And so I never really understood the reasons behind warming up. Most of the time I'd show up to the course like a few minutes before my tee time, or if I showed up early and I had time to go to the range, I'd be going to the range because I loved going to the range and, hit another giant mega plus bucket of balls because that was great. And I never went to the putting green or, heaven forbid, the chipping area. I used to think that like the putting green was near the first tee, so that if you were waiting on the first tee, then you could go to the putting green and maybe hit some putts. But like, who needs to warm up their putting? Like any moron can putt, right? You show up and you hit the ball, like it's right there. It's nothing hard. And hilariously enough, I wasn't aware enough to notice that I was struggling on the first few holes in every round I played, that, I'd get like doubles or at least a bogey or something on the first few holes as my body and mind like rediscovered which muscles needed to be involved and what the heck this golf swing was, because I literally just showed up on the first tee from wherever the heck I was previously. Yeah, not the sharpest. And even more hilariously, I used to call the first few holes warm-up holes. Usually it was for other people's benefit, so if somebody didn't do well in the first couple of holes, I'd be like, oh, don't worry, the first few were just warm-up holes, right? Trying to make them feel better, but not realizing that that's the mindset I was in, and I was destroying my scores in the first few holes, because you can't warm up when there are stakes. It's not the same thing, right? So your mind gets a little more occupied when you can't just have a do-over. So it's not the same as being on the range where you can hit 30 balls and see what happens, and if none of them work, it still doesn't matter that much. Anyway, there's a saying, something along the lines of, you can either learn or life will make you learn, and life made me learn. So I got older, I got tighter muscles, I ended up having some injuries, I had a pinched nerve in 2019, and so it basically forced me to have to warm up and have to stretch and do things before I played golf, because otherwise I basically wouldn't be able to move very much. And that also helped me learn why warm-ups are necessary. Like, we've all heard about how Tiger wakes up hours and hours before a round to warm up, and then you see stuff in like in Full Swing, we saw Justin Thomas and Rory McIlroy actually do a workout before the round. So I guess if they're doing all that, I could probably do a little bit, right? So now I do a little bit of stretching at home before I leave for the course. Usually something to warm my body up, mostly my legs. And then once I get to the course, I pull out my trusty massage gun to warm up all the muscles, especially if it's been a long drive. Now this one here is a Theragun. I love this thing. I upgraded to it. Previously I had like one of the Amazon versions, which was like $100. This one's like 200 something. I got it for a big sale on Black Friday, so it's a good time to buy. And this is probably 30-40% better than the Amazon one, so big fan. The other really cool thing about this is you can use this when you're in virtual meetings and they can only see this part of you. And so it helps me keep my lower body nice and chill, nice and relaxed when I'm in a meeting, especially the meetings that might be a little more infuriating. So yeah, many benefits. I also do some static and active stretching when I get to the course, usually on the range. And when I'm hitting a few balls, I just want to take some nice easy swings to get the right muscles woken up. One of the things I'm trying to avoid is going too hard too fast, because then I'm going to be using the wrong muscles. And with the wrong muscles, not going to hit all the right swing positions. So that's pretty important. And speaking of the range, I also make time to hit the range, usually for most rounds, but especially if it's something important, I make sure there's plenty of time for me to go to the range and hit all my swing checkpoints. Note that this isn't really what the pros do. The pros kind of go to the range to just get a feel for hitting the golf ball because they hit so many of them literally all the time. But we're amateurs, and for me, like, I need to basically double check all my swing checkpoints. So that's what I'm doing when I'm going to the range, and also kind of waking up the right muscles and stuff, right? And finally, I always make time now to make sure I hit a few putts. I get three things out of that. One, I can usually get a feel for what the green receptivity might be like. So when the ball lands from an approach shot, is it going to stop or is it just going to carry on rolling? So that's important for me to check. I get a good idea of green speed for sure. And then making sure I hit some of my putting checkpoints. Given that literally half the shots that we're playing are putts, it's kind of important to make sure that, like, my putter isn't all over the place. So this has been super helpful for me. Along with getting all the right muscles working, this has also meant I no longer waste the first few holes, which at my home course is really important because the first 3 holes have 2 par 5s, and they're a good opportunity to get a couple of birds or maybe even one bird and get a little bit of an advantage, right, for when the bogeys happen. And then obviously there's also the benefit of putting beforehand. Now you have better putting from the get-go and you're not trying to figure out green speed as you get onto the course itself. So altogether, these have made a huge difference to my game. And there was this core realization I had that if I wanted to be a scratch golfer, I couldn't do that by playing the first few holes in like 3-4 over par and then trying to play the rest of the round in 3-4 under, right? That's not a scratch golfer. That's like a +4 golfer, which is possible, but much harder to do. So I know I've harped on this a decent amount, but the physical warm-up has been super valuable, really important to my game. All right, and lesson number 2 was the mental warm-up. Now, if I wasn't physically warming up, you know for sure, ain't no chance I was mentally warming up. In fact, I never thought about the mental game at all, right? My process was show up, grip it and rip it, right? 150% aggression all of the time, straight line to the hole. That's the way it was. And as far as swing thoughts are concerned, I basically came up with them during the course of the round as I was trying to correct all the errors that I was having. And now I've got something new to remember on every shot. But like, we all do this, right? We're all like, ooh, you know, I'm not staying behind the ball. Okay, I'm just going to tell myself, just stay behind the ball on every shot. Before every shot, I'm going to stay behind. Hey, bud, can you just remind me, like, before every shot, just like stay behind the ball? All right, how many times have you done that? I have done that many times. Well, surprise, surprise, that mental game or lack thereof didn't work. But I kept trying it because that's the important part. Be consistent in your attempt to get different results from doing the same thing, right? And I didn't know then what I know now, which is that brainstorming is basically the worst thing you can do on the course because now you're putting your mind A, into problem-solving mode instead of playing golf mode, and B, you don't have enough opportunities to actually test out your hypotheses. So even if you came up with a solution, you're only going to have like 1 or maybe 2 shots to test it out. And on each shot, the conditions are going to be different, et cetera, et cetera. So you don't even know if you found the right answer. And how many times have you done this where you're like brainstorming, you've come up with an answer, and then 2 shots later, you come up with a different answer, and you're like, oh, let me add that to the list. And then 4 shots later, you come up with a different answer. And now you're trying to remember 5 new things that you hadn't thought of before the round. And I mean, your head's totally out of the game. So that's where I used to live. Well, as I increased my golf IQ, I realized that I had goals other than just kill the ball, and I needed to keep those in mind as I was playing the round. I also realized that I used to think about them before I drove to the course or on my way to the course, but then between there and the first tee, I tended to get a little bit lost because, you know, there's a lot going on. You're checking in, maybe you're talking to the starter, you're meeting your buddies, getting ready to hit that first shot. There was a lot going on. So I need something to remind me of what was important and what my goals were for the day without me having to remember those. So I started writing them down. And originally I did it because of the decade card. So my first one was really based off the decade app. It's got my yardages and a few other things on there. And I found it really useful. So I adapted it and made my own. And then that evolved into like a more detailed one. And now basically I write a new one like every month or so. There's like minor changes. Generally, like the mental stuff stays about the same. Some of the swing keys might change a tiny bit if I'm working on something different. But to be honest, I really just write them down every month as a way to like reinforce it in my mind. And the great thing about having them on paper is I don't have to remember them. And I often use them as the divider in my yardage book for like which hole I'm playing. And so I get to see it every time I open my yardage book. And if I need a break, I need a reset or something, I can go back and look at it every time. The great thing about having this written down is that it's kind of like having a caddy who can remind you of what's important because it's not something that lives up here. And so when I'm befuddled, you know, maybe I've hit a bad shot, maybe I'm talking to somebody else, and so I'm thinking about some other topic, it kind of pops up every time when I open up my yardage book. That's really helpful. It's also really helpful because I came up with these when I was chilling at home and I wasn't stressed about the round. And so my relaxed self, my relaxed, intelligent self came up with these. So I trust them too, right? This is what I came up with when I had all the thoughts and all the time in the world to come up with some good answers. And overall, like, I can't emphasize enough how helpful these have been. Some days I forget, some days, I maybe don't take it along if I'm just playing a casual round and I run off to the course and I leave my yardage book at home, or if I get lazy and I don't look at them. I don't play as well that day. So it's actually made a huge difference. And as you can see here from a time, effort, and impact perspective, both the physical and mental warm-ups are fairly low on time and effort, really. It doesn't take that long to do a quick little warm-up. It doesn't take that long to put some effort into doing a little mental warm-up. But the impact for both of them is huge, tremendously valuable. I cannot recommend them enough, which is why they're lessons number 1 and 2. All right, lesson number 3 was changing my on-course rules. Now, if you watched the part 1 video, you might remember me talking about how rules are basically beliefs that we have for ourselves about how certain things are meant to be. And we can change those because sometimes they get in our way. Like for me, I had rules around things like not getting a coach or swinging like a gorilla. You might remember that one. Well, my old on-course rules weren't really helping me either. Like always taking the most direct route, regardless of how aggressive it was, which basically meant like hitting driver everywhere. Trying to shape a little baby draw around this. No, I couldn't even spell baby draw. I had no business trying to hit one. And then I used to get angry for things not going according to plan, or in this case, more like wishes than planning, because ain't no real planning going into that. It was mostly like, please let this work, please let this work. If it didn't work, I used to get annoyed. And often I blamed other people for the things that I could control. Like, for example, if someone made some noise while I was like setting up or about to hit the ball, I used to blame them for me hitting a bad shot. I'd be like, oh, well, now I'm not gonna be able to set up properly. No, that was stupid. Or if the group in front of us was playing slow, I'd be like, oh man, they're putting me off my rhythm. And I'd get so annoyed about it and get caught up in the fact that they were playing slow. Like, yeah, it could put me off my rhythm, but does it have to? No, I can control that. And I finally realized by deciding that these things were not in my control made me a victim. And that's not what I wanted to be. So that was a pretty quick, I'm going to change this right now. And so I did. Like, for example, with the noise in the background thing, I basically decided that whenever that happens, it actually deepens my focus. And so I'm much more likely to hit a better shot. Or if the group in front of us is slow, I'll ask them once, maybe twice to speed up. But if they don't, I'm not willing to give up, lose the 4 or 5 hours that I came to spend on the golf course, because it's going to take an extra 15 or maybe 30 minutes longer than I expected. And so I use that time to, hang out with my buddies a little bit more, or focus on my game a little bit more, maybe practice a couple different new things, and just enjoy the extra 15 or 30 minutes I get on the golf course. And most importantly, I created a new rule for myself that I was going to be excited about every single shot on the golf course, regardless of how I got there, whether it was from the most beautifully struck 3-iron I'd ever hit, or from a shank. Doesn't matter. I was going to be super excited about that next shot because one day I'm going to want to be on the golf course and I'm not going to be there. It might be tomorrow during a meeting, or it might be many years from now, hopefully, when I'm not able to play any more golf. Hopefully by then we'll have exoskeletons and stuff that will sort this all out, but you get where I'm coming from. So changing these rules was super valuable for me. It helped me have a higher probability of success on all my shots. I ended up enjoying my rounds a lot more, and probably most importantly, I was probably much less annoying to play with for my playing partners. So they got a big benefit of that too. And from a time, effort, and impact perspective, I've listed them as like medium for time and effort because it does take some time to remind yourself and really focus on it. But the impact is huge, right? It's just more enjoyable on the golf course, better scores, more fun to play with. Like, why would you not do this? The impact is absolutely huge. Okay, lesson number 4 was learning to focus on hero scores, not hero shots. Now, as I mentioned, I used to go for it on every single shot, regardless of how risky it was. I'm talking about shots even the pros wouldn't go for, like 9 times out of 10. Just driver every time, every hole was a birdie hole. No idea about risk, only about return, which at the casino is a really good way to go broke real fast. Kind of explain my golf game at the time. I realize now that what I was doing was looking for the short-term satisfaction of hitting a nice shot, which in reality wasn't even me hitting a nice shot. It was mostly just getting lucky because I didn't really have a good swing to put on that shot, and then I hadn't done any planning. So yeah, most of it was dumb luck when it actually worked out right, which was about 3 times around. And instead, I should have just taken a minute to think about what I actually wanted from my golf game. Did I want to just show up and hit 2 or 3 lucky/good shots in a round, and that was my 5 or 6 hours on a park spent? Or did I want something more from it, like maybe actually becoming a good golfer and being able to shoot low scores really frequently? And so once I set a goal for what I wanted and started playing the long game instead of that hero shot game by learning about probabilities, basically like in a casino, you're not going to beat the house consistently. So on the golf course, you're not going to beat the game of golf consistently, then all of this became a lot easier. And funny enough, I actually realized that going for hero shots sometimes comes out of a place of fear, because I was so afraid of not being able to hit my next shot close that I would go for a crazy shot this time. Like, I'd be afraid of not making a 15-foot putt, so I'd aim much closer at the flag, go for a sucker pin, and try to hit it to 3 feet, which would end up being like 40 feet. Now I know that going for birdie every time makes it much more likely that I'm going to end up with bogey. And so I don't try to overpower the game the way I used to. This might be a good one for those of us with ball killing tendencies to remember, that you can't just always overpower the course with brute force. Sometimes you have to be a bit of an artist. An artiste, if you will. And now this whole concept of low scores, not hero shots, is actually part of my game plan. You'll see it here. It's the top one in the game plan here. And from a results perspective, along with avoiding the big numbers, the low score high actually lasts a lot longer than the hero shot high, right? Maybe you might remember 1 or 2 good shots that you've hit for some period of time, but low scores, they last for a long time. So that's really nice. And then there's also the added bonus of less spending on golf balls, because you tend to lose less golf balls when you're avoiding those big numbers. And then from a time, effort, and impact perspective, it takes very little time to do this, but the effort can be sizable, right? It's really hard to kind of talk yourself out of not hitting that hero shot, right? Trying to like draw this big hook around the trees over the pond so you can get like 20 yards closer to the flag. I get that. But once you get it, the impact is huge. It's really nice to just be able to hit low scores, and actually you could turn something like a regular 80 into a 74 just by making some smarter decisions. And that actually feels really good. So back to that high. It feels pretty good. Lesson number 5 was course management. Yeah, it sounds kind of funny to me too as I say that out loud. But hey, in line with my whole hero shot mentality, I used to basically draw straight lines to the hole and take the most aggressive line. Every hole was a birdie hole, so I went for every flag. And I really only used like the GPS apps. I had one, but I really only used it to figure out yardage, not actual like target for where I should be aiming from like a smartness perspective. You learn. I'd heard about course management, and I knew what the words meant individually, but definitely not what they meant together. So that was kind of rough. And in getting better, I learned to look at the hole more holistically. See what I did there? I learned how to use the app, plus maybe a yardage book, and sometimes Google Earth if I was prepping at home, to plot the smart way around the course with like a risk-return trade-off actually thought of versus just the straight line to the hole. Taking into account things like lies and wind and sucker pins. Those can be tough sometimes. And I've learned that most holes are not birdie holes for me. I'm happy with par on most holes, and sometimes I'm even happy with bogey. So you don't need me to tell you this, but course management is super, super valuable. You're much more likely to end up with better lies because you're playing the smart way around the course. You're probably going to end up with better shots because you know what the wind is doing, you know what the ball does coming out of this kind of a lie, etc. And the result is basically they end up with lower scores. So, I mean, course management is hugely valuable. I said this in part 1 as well, and I'll just repeat it here. The worse you are as a golfer, the more important course management is for you. So I highly recommend just spending a bunch of time learning about course management. And from a time, effort, and impact perspective, yeah, it takes a while to learn all this stuff, right? And there's a lot of little nuances. You don't need to know all of them, but you need to get like a general idea for these things. So it does take a decent amount of time. It takes a little bit of effort when you're on the course, you know, having your yardage book there to like check out what's happening. I plot stuff out beforehand as well. So there's a little bit of effort that's involved there, but the impact is huge. An easy way to just look at this is look at how many times you see pros pulling out their yardage books. And the answer is every time. Every single time they're pulling out a yardage book, trying to figure out the right way to play the hole. Course management was a massively valuable lesson for me. I'm so glad it only took me 21 years to figure this shit out. Okay, these next 2 are somewhat similar, but I've separated them on purpose because it's important to consider them individually. So number 6 is better shot planning. Now, in the past, I knew a little bit about different lies and to at least notice the wind, but I didn't really know the so what from these things. Like, I didn't know what the wind would do to the ball based on spin or type of shot I was hitting, and I didn't know how the lie really affected what happened to the ball once it landed. Basically, I was mostly focused on just hitting the shot, and all bets were off really once it left the club face. Except for the fact that, I was going for the pin. I mean, in case you haven't picked up on that, like, it was going at the pin. Terrible. Well, fortunately, that has all changed. It first started when I signed up to Decade Golf a couple of years ago, and I started thinking about, how should you aim a shot? That was really valuable to stuff that I learned from Decade. And while I wasn't a huge fan of the Decade method specifically, I did come up with my own method for thinking through the shot before hitting it. And fortunately now, it includes what's going to happen to the ball after it leaves the club face. Kind of important. And so in a nutshell, there's 3 parts to this method. I've got conditions, target, and swing. Conditions has things you can't control, so things like the lie, the wind, and the topography, like the area around you. The target is really distance, the landing spot, and maybe how much I want it to roll, and then also kind of where I want to miss. And then from a swing perspective, I'm thinking about the shape, the club I'm going to hit with, and then the feel that I'm going to get from hitting that club. And so I use this method now on pretty much every shot. It took a little while to get used to because there's these 9 steps, but once you get used to them, you can do them pretty fast. And it's kind of amazing how much more relaxed and just smoother the round feels when you've got this simple method and you're just playing smarter shots. And so from a results perspective, this better shot planning has definitely led to me hitting more greens. I just mentioned we got more relaxed rounds. And then I'm going to repeat this a lot, but basically all these do is they've all led to lower scores. And then from a time, effort, and impact perspective, yes, it takes a little bit of time to learn these different things, the different parts of better shot planning. There is some effort because it takes a little time to get used to, but the impact, again, lower scores. I'm sorry if I'm sounding like a broken record, but it works. That's it. It just works. So highly recommend it. Lesson number 7 is fewer lost and hazard balls. I mean, we all know this. One thing that really hurts your score is unnecessary penalties, especially as you get into the lower handicaps because every single shot counts, right? Now, in the past, I never really thought about hazards except usually for water because it kind of stares you in the face. But even then, I was super optimistic and I would take the straight line right over it. That ended up costing me a lot of strokes and a lot of golf balls. Over and over and over again, which literally fits Einstein's definition of insanity about, trying the same thing and expecting different results. Yep, did that. Did not get different results. But somehow, after learning my lesson like 700 or 800 times, I realized I might be doing something wrong. And so I finally started playing away from the hazards and away from the OB. But a key point for me was I needed to start labeling these shots not as safe shots, but as optimal shots. Right, think about that for a second. Ain't nobody want to play safe golf or boring golf, right? It doesn't sound like fun, but optimal golf sounds a little different. So anyway, switching to optimal shots instead of crazy shots helped me get those penalty shots off my scorecard, which helped me lower that handicap. And it's kind of nice not having to add strokes to your card that you didn't actually have the pleasure of hitting. And along with that, it's also nice to spend not as much time looking for lost golf balls because that takes a long time. And then it causes rushing on the future shots because more problems with it's just a whole thing. So it's better not to have to do that. And then from a time, effort, and impact perspective, it didn't take very much time to do. Again, it was a little bit of kind of emotional effort in there to not take that crazy shot. But once you put a little bit of effort in, you kind of start reframing things in your mind. It worked really nicely for me. And the impact, again, 2 penalty strokes around, that's like handicap down from 5 to 3. You just cut those out, which is hugely valuable. That's 2 balls lost in the water or 1 OB. It's actually not that much, but it makes a huge difference. That takes your handicap down by 40% from a 5 to a 3. So I'm really glad I learned that lesson. And to tell the truth, I'm kind of fading and going back the older way again because I'm starting to get a lot more penalty strokes on my card. So now that we're talking about this, or I'm talking about this to you, I think I'm going to change my strategy a little bit again and make sure I come back to the optimal shots because they're getting a little crazy right now. And now on to lesson number 8, which is my favorite. Good mental state and good self-talk. Now, this might seem hard to believe given how upbeat I am, but I was not always this upbeat. I get down on myself a lot. I mean, you could have even called me the, wait for it, beat up golfer. But seriously, in the past, if I hit a few bad shots, I'd A, give up, and or B, start forecasting a future, like a really negative future, one in which I wasn't happy, there was no joy, no puppies, no clouds, no rain, like nothing. The truth is that I was creating these really high expectations for myself, which makes no sense because I was expecting high output without having put in any kind of high input, which is basically just hoping for luck. And then I'd get pissed when I didn't win the lottery every time. Yeah, great recipe for success. And obviously this wasn't helping me, right? Number one, it hurt my game. These high expectations weren't good for me. Number two, like nobody likes to play with someone who sulks. It's hard to be the one to notice when you are the sulker that you're sulking, but everyone else can see it pretty freaking clearly. Fortunately, one of my other interests is learning about why we do what we do as humans and how to change it to something that helps and empowers us. And one of the things I realized was that I wouldn't play this game if there were no bad shots. It's the bad shots that make it interesting and keep me coming back for more. I also changed my philosophy on this to the point now where I don't believe there are bad shots. There's just shots in which I did what I wanted to do and shots in which I didn't do what I wanted to do. But to judge them good or bad, And an even bigger thing I learned is that a negative mental state is effectively self-perpetuating and can end up being a vicious cycle. Because as we get annoyed or angry, our body starts releasing stress hormones like cortisol into our bloodstream. And now with the cortisol in the bloodstream, cognitive function's impaired, there's other issues that happen, and so you're more likely to hit bad shots, which will stress you out, more cortisol. It's just not a happy place to be. Learning that was super valuable, along with remembering that golf is a game of ups and downs, and to only focus on the downs means forgetting that there's going to be ups, and that we don't actually know what the end result of the round might be. Like you could end up going birdie, birdie, birdie to finish, or you could hit so many bad shots that it finally forces you to figure out like a miracle cure for your swing because you're so pushed over the edge. Or maybe you meet somebody who becomes a best friend for life. Never know. But we tend to miss things when we're in a negative state, because in negative states, we tend to focus only on ourselves and very much in a woe is me kind of situation. And what do you know? Here's a great example of this from literally 2 days ago. So after a fantastic drive and an unlucky second shot, I got stuck in a tough spot on the first hole, but made this beautiful chip to make par. Feeling pretty good going to the second hole, crushed my drive into the wind. Beautiful second shot. About to hit my third shot. Nice little approach wedge into this par 5, and I shank it. All right, now it's in this big hazard. I knock it out, end up making double bogey. Whatever, get to the next hole, I'll be good. Monster drive again into the wind. Beautiful second shot, 3-wood. Shank my third shot. That's 2 shanks in a row. I don't really do this very often. Not going well. Doubled the third hole. Then we get to hole number 4. I hit a meh drive, end up in a bunker, and skull my third shot over the green, make double on that hole too. So Mr. 2 Handicap here is starting par, double, double, double. So in the past, I would have been like, F this, like I'm done. I'm just going to start wailing on the ball. It doesn't matter. This round is shot already. But it wasn't. I was only 2 down on the match. So if you watch any of my other videos, you know what I'm about to say, right? Time for my comeback story. And did I come back? Hells yeah. So after doubling 2, 3, and 4, I birdied 5 and then made 3 more birds coming in. I hit a bunch of beautiful drives, some really nice shots, a bunch of really nice recoveries, and I even won the match. So I ended up shooting even par for the rest of the round. So shot the 78 in the end, but hey, that was 14 holes of even par and 4 holes of not so even par. But the biggest benefit was that I learned a major key for a swing tweak that I've been working on. If you're interested, I've basically been working on keeping the club more in front of me because I tended to kind of have my hands too loose and it would get caught behind me. And what I learned from my 2 beautiful shanks was that I needed to hold the club a little bit tighter on my distance wedges so that I could keep it in front of me and not have it get caught or end up shanking the ball. So the question is, were those 2 shanks actually bad shots? And then from a results perspective, a good mental state kind of speaks for itself, right? A higher chance of good shots, less stress hormones, and we become more fun to play with. One thing to note here is it does take a little bit of effort, or maybe if you're someone who needs to work on their mental state, maybe more than a little bit of effort, but the impact is totally worth it. It just becomes way more fun, and you end up doing better with a better mental state and better self-talk. Big fan. Huge fan. So lesson number 9, optimizing hydration and nutrition. So in the past, I never really thought about what my body needed during a round. All I knew is that I didn't want to play on a full stomach, and sometimes I would take a water bottle along, but it was more of an afterthought, even though I live in California where it's super hot a lot of the time. Not the sharpest. So I ended up being dehydrated a lot, which affects your decision making, your coordination, your concentration, and even your ability to regulate your emotions so you get more annoyed faster. All works together. So anyway, with that, and sometimes basically like topping up with like a Coke Zero because it was delicious and cold, not really a reliable source of hydration, that didn't really go very well. And when it came to food, I basically depended on whatever the snack shop had at the turn, whether that was like a Cliff Bar or a muffin, or if I was feeling super healthy, maybe a sandwich. But I had no idea what any of these things actually do to your body. I was just only thinking about calories and eating some calories. Now I've learned that all calories aren't the same, and there's definitely some corners that are cut when you're talking about mass-produced, low-price, convenience-based food. This is not hate, by the way. There's no hate for the hot dog at the turn. You do you. It's just for me, I wasn't thinking about what I was eating or drinking at all, and it was hurting my game. So as I upped my golf IQ, and in my goal to reduce negative or potentially negative variables, I decided to change this. So now I carry at least 3 liters of water with me when I play. 3 liters. 3 liters. So now on the water side, I carry at least 3 liters of water with me when I play. That's 3 quarts and a bit in freedom units. And my goal is to sip a little bit on every hole, because dehydration is a lagging indicator. By the time you feel thirsty, you're already a little bit dehydrated, and so your concentration's already probably waned a little bit, and you've probably already dropped a couple of shots, which we do not want to do. So I do my best to like sip a little bit on every hole, just like Ricky Fowler's doing a lot of these days, and he's playing much better. Coincidence? And on the food side, I now carry my own snacks because I know what all the ingredients are. I kind of have a mix of good snack bars, some jerky. I throw in some nut mix sometimes as well. Try to keep a good mix going. And just little things also, like I don't eat an entire like sugary snack bar at once. I'll like pace it out over a couple of holes so I don't have like a sugar high and then a sugar crash. So just little things, but they make a huge difference. I did try for a little while. I intermittently fast, so I don't usually eat breakfast. So I tried fasting a lot on the golf course, but I found that as I got towards the back 9, my concentration started to dip a little bit and it didn't really help my game. So I make sure that I eat. I don't eat a ton, but I make sure that I eat when I'm playing. And in doing the research for this video, I found this article that talks about how low blood sugar and dehydration are both also cues for anxiety. So I guess just eating on the course helps with being less anxious or nervous as well. So double whammy right there. So from a results perspective, your brain's firing all cylinders when you're well hydrated, no sugar crashes, so you'd be feeling pretty good, and lower anxiety like we just talked about. Fairly easy to do. It does take a little bit of effort to like kind of get all that stuff together, but super valuable. So definitely something to pay attention to. And I think it's also interesting on TV when I'm watching the pros play. It's interesting to see what different people are eating. You see people having protein shakes, some have fruit, some actually eat old school sandwiches. So everyone's got a plan. They all have nutritionists. So there's definitely something going on there. But food and hydration are definitely huge deals. And so maybe something to think about for your game too. So lesson 10 was optimizing my coffee and bourbon intake. Now, in line with the food and water piece and optimizing for things that reduced variability for me on the course, I also found that I needed to adjust my coffee and bourbon intake. And now you're probably wondering, why am I telling you my life story about coffee? So you understand how much I love golf. So I never really drank coffee until about 10 years ago when I was a management consultant and I was working on a project in Minnesota where our clients like to start at like 7 a.m., which meant for me that was like a 3 a.m. home time zone wake up. And so coffee became my crutch, or more like a mobility scooter. I had a lot of coffee back then. It was like a lot of coffee. So anyway, I took this love of coffee to the golf course and I always used to have like a flask of coffee ready to go. And then one day I heard about how you don't need coffee right as you wake up because your body releases cortisol into your bloodstream to wake you up. And so it's best if you wait like 90 minutes before you have some caffeine. No problem. So I used to take 2 thermoses, one with herbal tea and then one with coffee, and like 3-4 holes on, I would start having the coffee. And I found that I'd actually play pretty well in holes 1 to 3, and then starting hole 4 or whenever I had the coffee, my brain would start getting a little bit too busy. I'd start swinging for the fences and things would basically just start falling apart. Eventually, I figured out that maybe the caffeine's doing something, so I switched to black tea because I still needed some caffeine, otherwise the headaches basically would make my game go to absolute crap. And the black tea was a little bit better. So in the end, I realized that caffeine was actually messing up my game. And this is how much I love golf. I stopped drinking coffee. Not cold turkey because I'm not stupid, but I weaned myself off by going to black tea and then like reducing the black tea intake and so on. And now I don't drink coffee because it causes me problems on the golf course. And while we're on the topic of let's get rid of things that give us joy, I also found the same thing for my flask of bourbon that I used to carry with me. This thing had my pick-me-up / celebration juice in it, and I'd usually get into it by like the 10th hole at the turn, or you get kind of a snack, maybe you have a load of bourbon. But unfortunately, I found it was really hard to manage that high between maxing and relaxing and like, let's friggin' go.
Do it up again! Keep so good! Once it hits your lips, it's so good!
So it ended up being by, the 14th, 15th hole, maybe I'd be like, oh, we should totally get some more. And I tended to fall apart towards the end of the round. And so I made the very difficult decision to move that celebratory or commiseratory, is that the word? Pick me up juice beverage to being after the round. And on the coffee front, I've basically don't drink caffeine anymore unless I've had virtually no sleep. And then I'll try something like green tea, which has some L-theanine, which is a chemical that kind of smooths out that coffee high. Otherwise, I get a little too jittery. But on the plus side, it's kind of nice not being dependent on caffeine anymore. In the past, I was very grumpy if I didn't get my coffee. And on the alcohol front, if I care about my score that day, I save the beverages for after the round. But sometimes I just want to have a good time with my buddies. And then, all of those rules no longer apply. Now, I'm not telling anyone to stop drinking coffee. I realize there's a lot of optimizational, is that a word? Uses of caffeine. So you should do you. But if you're interested, you could experiment with your caffeine intake and see when is best for you, whether you want to have right before your round or maybe sip it during the round or cut it out completely or maybe increase it. I don't know. I don't know what your life is like. But there's lots of different ways, and maybe you could see what would be most optimizational. We'll use that word again until it becomes a thing. Most optimizational for your golf game. So maybe give it a go. And lesson number 11, the last big thing I did to improve my on-course game was tracking how I played. I also talked about this in the off-course section, but because I did most of this tracking on course, it belongs here too. So in the past, I never really tracked anything, not even fairways and greens. To be honest, I was so caught up in my own expectations that I didn't really think about any of that stuff. And if someone mentioned that I got a green at regulation or something like that, I'd be like, oh yeah, great. And then go right back to being kind of in my head, usually beating myself up for a shot that I shouldn't have hit in the first place. But as I learned more and up my golf IQ, I realized you can't improve what you don't know you need to improve. So I started tracking. So I started with looking at just fairways, greens, and putts because that's basically what the Grint tracked. And I figured, oh, maybe there's some value in looking at these. And then I got access to Decade Golf, which has like 9,000 variables that you can track. And so I started getting into really detailed notes. I had these super detailed scorecards where I noted down literally all these little things that happened. So I knew every kind of shot and I could put it into that Decade app. But that ended up taking a long time. So I kind of backed off of that a little bit. And a little while ago, I got these Arcos sensors, which basically do all the tracking for me. And one huge thing that I've learned is when I'm tracking things, I'm much more switched on and in game mode versus other times I can kind of get a little more spaced out as I'm walking between shots and I'm not fully focused on every shot. So tracking just as a thing in itself is helpful for me to stay more in the game. The other benefit of tracking for me is that I start noticing things that are happening during the round. So maybe if I'm missing a bunch of fairways, I go, I see a bunch of fairways, maybe I need to do some different on this next hole. Or if I'm tracking my putts, because I've started creating my own spreadsheets to track the things that I know I need to work on, I can figure out, I'm missing all my putts on the high side today, so maybe there's less break than I'm seeing. So tracking's actually been really helpful for me both after the round and during the round because I can see these little things that might need to be adjusted. But there is a little bit of nuance here. I definitely want to make sure that I'm not beating myself up for not hitting some stat goals during the round because I am tracking and I know what's going on. And instead, I want to be fairly objective and basically dispassionate as much as possible during the round. There's plenty of time afterwards for like critiquing and seeing what's happening there. And just a quick note on the time, effort, and impact here. It does take a bunch of effort. And so for some people, it can take you out of your rhythm if you're having to like write down at every hole. So maybe something that you try out for yourself and maybe use sparingly, maybe use it like once every 3 rounds or use it every round, depending on how much it gets you into the zone or not, or takes you out of your zone the way that you're playing. And we made it. Here is the full list of things we just went through. I hope you found something here that you want to try. And if you're thinking, wow, that's so much stuff, I have no idea where to start, I suggest starting with numbers 3, 4, 5, and 8. In my opinion, those are the ones that are the biggest bang for the buck. In no particular order. Start with whatever works for you. And if you don't mind me asking you for a quick favor, I would love it if you could take a sec to drop me a comment and let me know what you thought of this video and if there were any parts that resonated with you. And if you're sold on course management, check out this video right here. Okay, that's it. Keep hanging out being cool and see you on the other side. Bye. And even more hilariously, I'm still doing this. Okay.